Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly through every installment of Five Nights at Freddy's, tracing the evolution of this franchise from a simple indie horror game to a sprawling universe of terror that has captivated millions across more than a decade. From humble beginnings in a single pizzeria office to virtual reality experiences and augmented reality encounters that blur the line between digital horror and physical space. This is the story of how Scott Cawthon's creation grew from one night guard survival story into a phenomenon that redefined horror gaming itself. Whether you're revisiting familiar corridors and camera feeds, discovering these chapters for the first time, or simply letting the chronicle wash over you like a gentle tide as sleep takes hold. This will carry you through the complete journey of Five Nights at Freddy's, game by game, mechanic by mechanic, revelation by revelation. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive storytelling that unfolds like a dream. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet wonder to see the same story weaving through different corners of the world, one hushed night at a time. Let's begin. The birth of a nightmare. Five Nights at Freddy's. In August of 2014, an independent game developer named Scott Cawthon released something that would fundamentally alter the landscape of horror gaming. Five Nights at Freddy's arrived on August 8th via the Desera platform, followed 10 days later by a Steam release that would introduce countless players to a new kind of dread. The game's conception emerged from an unexpected source, from criticism rather than inspiration, from failure transformed into innovation. Cawthon had previously developed family-friendly games, including one called Chipper and Sons Lumber Company, a resource management title featuring cheerful woodland creatures. Yet reviewers noted something unsettling about the characters, describing them as resembling frightening animatronics despite their intended innocence. Rather than retreating from this feedback, Cawthon embraced it, asking himself a simple question that would echo through gaming history. What if I made something intentionally terrifying? The premise he created was deceptively simple. You play as Mike Schmidt, a night security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a family restaurant whose cheerful daytime atmosphere conceals darker mechanical realities. The establishment features 4 animatronic performers: Freddy Fazbear himself, the titular brown bear with a top hat and microphone, Bonnie the blue rabbit with his red bow tie and guitar, Chica the yellow chicken accompanied by her cupcake companion, and Foxy the pirate fox, whose tattered appearance suggests years of wear and aggressive performance. During operating hours, these mechanical entertainers delight children with songs and shows. But when darkness falls and the pizzeria empties, something changes in their programming, or perhaps in something deeper that inhabits their metal frames. The gameplay Cawthon designed stripped horror down to its most essential elements, creating tension through limitation rather than spectacle. You remain confined to a small security office, a cramped space with 2 doors flanking you, and a desk covered in monitors displaying 12 different camera feeds throughout the building. Your only defenses are those doors, which can be closed to block the animatronics from entering, and lights that illuminate the blind spots immediately outside each entrance. The genius and the terror lies in a single constraint that transforms every action into a calculated risk. You have limited power. A battery indicator in the corner of your screen ticks downward throughout the night, draining as you check cameras, illuminate doorways, or seal yourself behind closed doors. Use too much power too quickly, and you'll find yourself in complete darkness before 6 in the morning arrives. Vulnerable and exposed as the animatronics close in. Conserve too cautiously, and you won't see them coming until it's too late. Every decision becomes a negotiation between knowledge and safety, between the comfort of surveillance and the security of closed doors. The phone guy, voiced by Scott Cawthon himself, guides you through these mechanics via pre-recorded messages that grow increasingly ominous as the nights progress. His casual tone discussing the pizzeria's history and the animatronic's nocturnal behavior masks darker implications. He mentions something called the Bite of 87, an incident that apparently resulted in someone losing their frontal lobe and led to the animatronics being prohibited from wandering during daylight hours. He explains that the robots are programmed to interpret any human they encounter after hours as an endoskeleton without its costume, and their response to this perceived malfunction is to forcibly stuff the person into a Freddy Fazbear suit, a process that proves fatal given the crossbeams and animatronic devices filling every inch of those mechanical shells. Through camera feeds and newspaper clippings visible on walls, fragments of a darker story emerge. Children have gone missing, 5 of them specifically, lured to a back room by someone in a mascot costume. The establishment has been linked to suspicious circumstances, blood and mucus seeping from the animatronics during the day, a pervasive smell of decay that management has struggled to explain away. These details exist at the periphery of your immediate concern, your survival through each 6-hour shift from midnight until 6 in the morning, but they plant seeds that would blossom into the sprawling narrative the series would eventually tell. Each animatronic possesses distinct behavior patterns that players must learn and anticipate. Bonnie tends to approach from the left side of the building, moving through the dining area and supply closet before appearing in the left hallway. Chica favors the right path, sometimes lingering in the kitchen where audio cues, the sound of pots and pans clattering, alert you to her presence since no camera covers that room. Foxy operates differently, hiding behind a curtain in Pirate Cove, becoming progressively more aggressive if you neglect to check his camera feed regularly. Freddy himself moves slowly at first, advancing methodically through the building, his glowing eyes appearing in darker camera feeds as he draws closer, his signature laugh echoing through the establishment as a warning of his approach. The jump scares that became the game's signature feature emerged organically from these mechanics. If an animatronic reaches your office while your door remains open, or if the power dies completely, leaving you defenseless in the dark, they lunge toward the screen with a piercing electronic screech, filling your vision with their gnashing teeth and dead eyes before the game abruptly cuts to a static-filled game over screen. These moments of pure visceral terror became iconic, launching thousands of YouTube videos capturing players' reactions, spreading the game's reputation far beyond what any marketing campaign could achieve. What made Five Nights at Freddy's remarkable wasn't simply its scares, but the way it generated dread through anticipation. The silence between threats proved more terrifying than the threats themselves. Every time you lowered the monitor to check your doors, you faced the possibility that something might be waiting. Every crackle of static or distant footstep sent adrenaline spiking. The game transformed the act of gathering information into a source of vulnerability, making knowledge itself feel dangerous. The development tools Cawthon used, ClickTeam Fusion 2.5, allowed him to create the entire experience in roughly 6 months. The graphics possessed a deliberately lo-fi quality, security camera footage rendered in grainy low resolution, animatronics that moved in stuttering frames that made their approach feel unnatural and wrong. This aesthetic choice, born partly from the limitations of indie development, became central to the game's effectiveness. The imperfect visuals forced players to peer into darkness and static, to question whether that shape in the corner of a camera feed was a threat or a trick of the pixelation. Upon release, Five Nights at Freddy's achieved something rare for an independent title, both critical acclaim and viral popularity. Review aggregator Metacritic scored it at 78, indicating generally favorable reception. Critics praised its minimalist approach to horror, its ability to create terror without graphic violence or elaborate set pieces. Omri Petit of PC Gamer described it as a less is more experience, where fear stemmed from anticipation rather than direct threats. Game Revolution called it one of the most terrifying games its reviewer had ever played. The silence during gameplay, interrupted only by the sounds of the animatronics moving and systems draining power, created what GameSpot described as panic-inducing atmosphere. Some criticisms emerged, particularly regarding replay value once players mastered the animatronics patterns. But these concerns were overshadowed by the game's cultural impact. Let's Play videos proliferated across YouTube, introducing the game to exponentially larger audiences than would have discovered it organically. Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, PewDiePie, and countless other content creators screamed and strategized their way through Nights at Freddy's, turning the experience into a shared phenomenon that transcended the game itself. The lore hidden within the game, the fragments of story about missing children and mysterious incidents, sparked intense speculation and theory crafting within the rapidly growing fan base. Players pored over every detail, every newspaper clipping and phone call, constructing elaborate explanations for why the animatronics behaved as they did. The implication that children's souls might possess these machines, that the murders Phone Guy mentioned might be connected to their nocturnal aggression, created a narrative foundation that would support increasingly complex stories in future installments. The game's success can be measured not just in sales, though it performed remarkably for an indie title, but in the speed with which it generated sequels. Within 3 months of the original's release, Cawthon would announce Five Nights at Freddy's 2, already deep in development. The formula he'd created, the combination of strategic resource management, pattern recognition, and pure atmospheric dread, proved endlessly adaptable. But more than that, the universe he'd begun building through those scattered hints and implications contained depths that demanded exploration. Looking back at this first game from the vantage of 2025, after more than a decade and dozens of subsequent releases, Five Nights at Freddy's remains remarkably effective. Its core mechanics haven't aged because they were never dependent on cutting-edge technology or elaborate systems. The fear it generates comes from something more fundamental, the human response to being trapped in darkness with something that wants to find you, the panic of watching power drain away as the mechanical footsteps echo closer, the split-second decision about whether to check a camera or close a door, knowing you can't do both. The game established conventions that would define the series: the camera system for monitoring threats, the limited resource creating constant tension, the environmental storytelling through background details, the jump scares as punishment for failure, and above all, the sense that something larger and more terrible than your immediate survival lurked beneath the surface. It created questions without providing easy answers. Why do the animatronics hunt you? What really happened to those children? What is the true history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza? These questions would drive the franchise forward, each new game adding layers of revelation and complication. But they began here, in this small office, with its flickering lights and draining battery. In the simple premise of one night guard trying to survive until morning, in a place where children's entertainers become something far more sinister when the sun goes down. Expanding the horror. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. The success of the original Five Nights at Freddy's created both opportunity and pressure for Scott Cawthon. Within months of the first game's release, he found himself riding a wave of unexpected popularity, his creation discussed and dissected across gaming communities worldwide. Rather than taking time to carefully plan a sequel, Cawthon did something remarkable and somewhat reckless. He announced Five Nights at Freddy's 2 in October of 2014 and released it barely a month later, on November 10th. This rapid turnaround would become characteristic of the series' early years, with Cawthon producing games at a pace that seemed impossible for a solo developer. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 immediately distinguished itself from its predecessor through a temporal twist that would become central to understanding the franchise's timeline. While the first game took place in what players assumed was 1993, based on the paycheck shown at the game's end, this sequel actually served as a prequel, set during 1987 at a grand reopening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This new location featured upgraded animatronics, sleeker and more child-friendly versions of the familiar characters dubbed the toy animatronics, alongside the withered remains of the original performers, now relegated to a parts and service room. The gameplay underwent significant evolution, while maintaining the core formula of surviving from midnight to 6 in the morning. This time, you play as Jeremy Fitzgerald, a night guard working the graveyard shift during the restaurant's busiest week, dealing with the aftermath of recent mysterious incidents that have cast a shadow over the grand reopening. The most dramatic change from the original game was the removal of doors. Your office no longer has the ability to seal itself off completely. Instead, you're given a Freddy Fazbear head, an empty animatronic mask that you can don to fool the robots into thinking you're one of them when they enter your space. This simple change fundamentally altered the gameplay dynamic. Where the first game was about prevention, using doors and lights to keep threats at bay, the sequel forced players into closer, more uncomfortable encounters. Animatronics would enter your office, peering at you from mere inches away, and your only defense was to slip on that mask and hope they accepted the deception. The vulnerability this created, sitting motionless as mechanical entertainers scrutinized you, unable to check cameras or prepare for other threats, introduced a different flavor of horror than the first game's barrier-based defense. The cast of antagonists expanded dramatically. The toy animatronics, including Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica, featured glossy plastic coverings and child safety conscious designs, cheerful and modern compared to their older counterparts. Yet these supposedly safer iterations proved just as deadly after hours, their movements faster and more aggressive than the original animatronics. Toy Bonnie's bright green eyes and guitar, Toy Chica's bib reading Let's Party and her removable beak, and Toy Freddy's updated design with rosy cheeks all maintained an eerie cheerfulness even as they hunted you through the night. The Mangle, a gender-neutral animatronic fox that children were apparently allowed to disassemble and reassemble during the day, had become a twisted amalgamation of parts that crawled along the ceiling, its broken form somehow more disturbing than any intact animatronic. The sound of its radio static, growing louder as it approached through the vents, became one of the game's most anxiety-inducing audio cues. Balloon Boy, a small humanoid animatronic that couldn't directly attack you, served a more insidious purpose, stealing your flashlight batteries and leaving you vulnerable to other threats. His childish voice, repeating hello and hi, becoming unexpectedly menacing through sheer persistence. The withered originals, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy from the first game, appeared in states of disrepair. Bonnie missing his face entirely, Chica's hands stripped of covering to reveal bare endoskeleton, Foxy's suit severely damaged. These deteriorated forms proved even more unsettling than their original appearances, suggesting years of neglect and raising questions about why the pizzeria kept these broken animatronics at all, rather than scrapping them entirely. At the center of the new threats lurked the puppet, also known as the marionette, a slender black and white figure that lived in a music box. One of the game's most critical mechanics involved winding this music box via a camera feed, maintaining its melody to keep the puppet contained. If the music box ran down completely, the puppet would emerge and hunt you, an attack that couldn't be prevented by the Freddy mask or any other defense. This constant need to wind the music box created persistent tension, forcing players to balance multiple priorities and never allowing complete focus on any single task. Golden Freddy returned from the first game, now appearing in a withered, slumped form in your office, a rare occurrence that instantly killed you if you didn't don the Freddy mask quickly enough. The randomness of these appearances, the fact that Golden Freddy bypassed all normal mechanics and could simply materialize in your space, created moments of pure panic that broke through any sense of strategic control players might develop. The phone guy, returning once again with guidance messages, took on new narrative significance in this game. His calls grew increasingly desperate over the course of the week, mentioning an investigation into the pizzeria, the building being on lockdown, someone using an old yellow suit from the back room. On night 4, his final message played, and players heard him being attacked by animatronics, his fate apparently sealed. This gave the franchise its first clear character death, transforming Phone Guy from an abstract helper into a victim of the very horrors he'd been helping you navigate. The minigames between nights introduced a new layer of storytelling. These simple Atari-style sequences depicted events from the pizzeria's past, showing a puppet giving gifts to children who appeared as ghostly figures, an animatronic pursuing someone through the restaurant, fragments of tragedy playing out in pixelated abstraction. One minigame titled Give Gifts, Give Life showed the puppet animating the 4 main animatronics, placing masks on slumped figures in a scene that heavily implied the spirits of murdered children possessing the machines. The newspapers visible in the game's ending sequence confirmed what many players suspected from the first game. 5 children had been murdered at this location, lured into a back room by someone wearing a spare animatronic costume. The restaurant had been closed following these incidents, only to reopen with the new toy models, attempting to distance itself from the tragedy. The game implied that the suspect had never been successfully prosecuted, leaving the murderer unpunished and the children's spirits restless within the animatronic shells. The Bite of 87, mentioned in the first game as backstory, occurred during this game's timeline. On day shift following Jeremy's week of survival, a phone message indicates he's been moved to day shift due to complaints about the night guard. On this day shift, November 14th, 1987, someone is bitten by an animatronic, losing their frontal lobe in an incident that would lead to corporate policies prohibiting animatronic movement during operating hours. The game doesn't explicitly show this event, maintaining ambiguity about which animatronic was responsible and who the victim was, though many theories suggest Jeremy himself might have been the victim, given the timeline. The multiple endings based on completion percentage added replay value. The bad endings showed the original animatronics remaining lit with glowing eyes, suggesting the spirits within had not been freed. The good ending, achieved by completing all minigames, showed these same animatronics with dark, empty eyes, implying some measure of peace had been achieved, though the circumstances of this release remained mysterious. Critically, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 received mixed reviews compared to its predecessor. Metacritic scored it at 62, lower than the original's 78. Some reviewers from Destructoid and Touch Arcade found the new mechanics and larger cast creatively enriching, appreciating the increased complexity and challenge. Others, including Mitch Vogel of Nintendo Life, found the difficulty punishing and the jump scares excessive, criticizing the game for adding stress without adding meaningful horror. Despite these mixed reviews, the game proved immensely popular with fans. The expanded lore, the confirmation that children's spirits possessed the animatronics, the appearance of a mysterious golden suit-wearing figure who would later be identified as William Afton. All these elements deepened the mythology in ways that had players constructing elaborate timelines and theories. The revelation that this game preceded the first chronologically recontextualized the original story, suggesting that the restaurant featured in the first game represented yet another attempt to reopen following the tragedy depicted in the sequel. The rapid release schedule, barely 3 months after the original game, became both a blessing and a curse for the franchise. It maintained momentum and kept the fan base engaged, but it also set expectations for future releases that would prove difficult to sustain. Players began anticipating new Five Nights at Freddy's games at regular intervals, and Cawthon, whether by design or compulsion, would largely deliver on these expectations. The gameplay innovations, particularly the Freddy mask mechanic and the music box management, demonstrated Cawthon's willingness to iterate rather than simply reskin the original formula. Each change forced players to adapt their strategies, to learn new patterns and develop new skills. The removal of doors, initially seeming like a limitation that would make the game easier, actually increased tension by removing the sense of security that closed doors provided, replacing barrier-based defense with deception and timing. The aesthetic choices maintained the lo-fi camera feed quality of the original, while introducing more elaborate character models and animations. The toy animatronics plasticine shine contrasted eerily with the withered original's decay, creating visual variety that kept the camera feeds interesting to observe. The sound design expanded to include more distinct audio signatures for each animatronic, helping players track threats even when they couldn't see them directly. Looking back at Five Nights at Freddy's 2 from the perspective of the broader franchise, this sequel established several patterns that would define the series going forward. It showed Cawthon's commitment to exploring the timeline non-linearly, telling the story out of chronological order to maximize mystery and revelation. It demonstrated his willingness to dramatically change gameplay mechanics between installments, rather than playing it safe with incremental improvements. And it expanded the cast of characters and the depth of lore in ways that suggested the story was far larger than any single game could contain. the game's depiction of corporate negligence and cover-up. With Fazbear Entertainment repeatedly reopening after tragedies, sacrificing safety for profit, introduced themes that would resonate throughout the series. The faceless corporation became almost a character itself, its desperate attempts to maintain a family-friendly image despite mounting evidence of danger and death, adding a layer of mundane horror to the supernatural threats. Into the ruins. Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Just as the previous games had arrived with surprising speed, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 materialized mere months after its predecessor, launching on March 2nd, 2015 for PC, followed shortly by mobile ports. This third installment marked the first time in the series that players were looking forward rather than backward in the timeline, set decades after the previous games. Phone Guy's recordings mention the safe rooms being sealed for most of these years, suggesting significant time has passed, leading many to place the game somewhere in the range of 2015 to 2023, though the exact year remained deliberately ambiguous in the game itself. The setting itself represented a dramatic departure from the family pizzerias of previous games. Fazbear's Fright. The horror attraction transformed the franchise's tragic history into a profitable sideshow. This horror attraction, set to open in a week, had been assembled by entrepreneurs who recognized that the dark legends surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had taken on a life of their own, becoming urban myth fodder perfect for exploitation. The attraction's creators had collected authentic relics from the abandoned pizzerias, including props, decorations, empty animatronic shells, and, most importantly, one genuine animatronic they'd discovered sealed away in a hidden room. You play as an unnamed security guard, hired to watch over the attraction during its final week of preparation, monitoring cameras and systems through overnight shifts as the exhibits are finalized. The guard's identity sparked immediate speculation among fans, with many theorizing this might be Michael Afton, son of the series murderer William Afton, based on later revelations and patterns in the series, though the game itself provides no explicit confirmation. The guard's apparent mission, beyond simple security, seemed to involve ensuring the horror attraction burned down, eliminating the last physical traces of the Fazbear curse, a reading supported by the week's conclusion, but never directly stated. The gameplay stripped things down to their essence, featuring only one active animatronic antagonist for most of the experience, Springtrap, this weathered golden rabbit animatronic, discovered boarded up in a previously sealed safe room of the old pizzeria, became the game's primary threat. But Springtrap wasn't just another possessed animatronic. As players would discover through minigames and environmental clues, Springtrap contained the remains of William Afton himself, the man responsible for the child murders that had haunted the series from the beginning. The backstory, pieced together through hidden minigames, revealed Afton's fate. Years after his initial crimes, he'd returned to the abandoned pizzeria where the original animatronics sat dormant. There, he dismantled them one by one, apparently attempting to destroy the evidence of his crimes, or perhaps extract something from the machines themselves, something connected to the spirits he'd trapped within them. But the spirits, freed from their animatronic prisons, manifested as ghostly children who cornered Afton in the sealed safe room. In desperation, he climbed into a Spring Bonnie suit, one of the old spring lock costumes that could function either as an animatronic or be worn by a human performer. The spring locks, mechanisms that compress the animatronic components to make space for a human, were notoriously dangerous, requiring careful handling and strict avoidance of moisture. The sealed room's roof had been leaking, whether from the damp air or Afton's own fear-induced sweat. The locks failed catastrophically. Metal bars and animatronic pieces snapped into place, impaling Afton from within the suit, inflicting wounds that should have killed him instantly. But something, perhaps the same supernatural forces that bound children's spirits to machines, or simply Afton's own twisted determination, kept him alive within the suit. For 30 years, he remained sealed in that room as his body decayed and merged with the mechanical components, until the horror attraction's creators discovered him and brought him to their new venue, unknowingly unleashing him once again. The gameplay mechanics reflected this singular threat. Rather than multiple animatronics to track, you focused entirely on Springtrap as he moved through the attraction's network of rooms and corridors. The camera system remained central, but with new functionality. An audio system allowed you to play recordings of children's voices in different rooms, luring Springtrap away from your location by exploiting whatever remained of Afton's obsessions. Vents connecting various areas had to be sealed to block his approach, and maintenance panels controlled ventilation, audio systems, and camera feeds, all of which could fail randomly, requiring reboots that left you temporarily blind. The Phantom animatronics added psychological horror without direct physical threat. These twisted, burnt versions of characters from previous games, Phantom Freddy, Phantom Chica, Phantom Foxy, Phantom Mangle, Phantom Puppet, and Phantom Balloon Boy, appeared randomly in camera feeds or directly in your office. When they appeared, they triggered jump scares that, while not ending the game directly, caused system failures. Ventilation would shut down, filling your office with smoke that obscured your vision. Audio might cut out, removing your ability to lure Springtrap. Camera feeds could become disabled, leaving you blind to his movements. These phantoms seem to be hallucinations, perhaps generated by faulty ventilation causing hypoxia, or perhaps manifestations of the trauma and death that saturated the attraction's salvaged equipment. They couldn't kill you, but they made it easier for Springtrap to reach you, creating indirect threats that felt unpredictable and uncontrollable. The burnt, greenish-tinted appearance of these phantoms suggested they might be connected to a fire, foreshadowing the attraction's fate. Phone Dude, a younger, more casual figure than the previous game's phone guy, provided guidance through the week, his laid-back surfer tone contrasting with the horror he was unknowingly facilitating. His calls discussed the attraction's setup, the authentic props they'd acquired, and most significantly, his excitement about finding a real animatronic. He also mentioned speaking with the previous company's owner, a revelation that would prove significant for understanding Henry Emily's role in the franchise's larger story. The mini-games between nights provided crucial lore revelations. One sequence showed Shadow Freddy, a mysterious dark purple animatronic, luring the original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy to a back room where they're destroyed. Another minigame depicted a person in a golden rabbit suit, cornered by ghost children, then climbing into the suit and suffering the spring lock failure. These pixel art sequences, deliberately simple and abstract, conveyed horrific events through implication and interpretation, forcing players to fill in the gaps with their imagination. The good ending, achieved by completing hidden tasks within the minigames, showed the spirits of the 5 murdered children apparently finding peace, their masks falling away to reveal simple faces that then fade. This suggested that freeing them from their animatronic prisons allowed them to move on, though questions remained about whether this ending represented an in-universe event or simply a symbolic depiction of what the player's actions had achieved thematically. The game's climax aligned with its themes of cleansing through destruction. By the end of the week, Fazbear's Fright burns down, officially attributed to faulty wiring, but likely an act of deliberate arson by the guard. The newspaper articles visible after completing the game mentioned that most of the exhibits were damaged beyond repair, and that a search of the ruins had turned up no corpses, leaving the attraction's fate ambiguous but suggesting potential closure. However, one article contains an ominous line. The attraction's owners claim they have an animatronic found in the bag and may attempt another venture. An image accompanying this text shows Springtrap clearly visible through flames, suggesting William Afton survived the fire once again. Critically, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 received a Metacritic score of 68, slightly higher than the second game but still below the original's reception. Omri Petit of PC Gamer appreciated the updated camera system and maintenance mechanics, but felt the Phantom animatronics lacked the impact of previous games' threats. Nick Rowan of Destructoid found it mechanically solid, but lacking the charm that had made earlier entries special, suggesting the formula might be showing fatigue. However, the game's narrative contributions proved invaluable for understanding the franchise's mythology. The revelation of William Afton's fate, the suggestion that he'd become the monster known as Springtrap, provided a face and a fate for the murderer who'd lurked in the background of previous games. The implication that spirits could be freed from their mechanical prisons introduced hope that the cycle of haunting might eventually end. And the fire, while failing to destroy Springtrap, established fire as a potential tool for combating the supernatural corruption that had spread from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The single animatronic focus proved divisive. Some players appreciated the streamlined experience, finding it allowed for more focused tension and strategy. Others missed the variety and multitasking challenge of tracking multiple threats simultaneously. The Phantom animatronic's indirect threat, causing system failures rather than direct game overs, created a different kind of frustration, one based on loss of control rather than failure to react quickly enough. The aesthetic design of Fazbear's Fright, with its deliberately cheap-looking horror attraction trappings, props and decorations purchased from costume shops, mixed with authentic relics from real tragedies, created a meta-commentary on how trauma gets commercialized. The attraction's creators saw profit in fear, exploiting real deaths and supernatural hauntings without understanding the genuine danger they were unleashing. This theme of corporate exploitation, present throughout the series, reached perhaps its most cynical expression here, where tragedy becomes entertainment literally, rather than just figuratively. The game's position as the first installment set in the series' relative future created expectations that this might be the conclusion of the story. The child spirits appeared freed, the primary murderer trapped in an undead form and seemingly destroyed by fire, and the corporate entity behind the original tragedies apparently defunct. But the image of Springtrap surviving the flames, combined with the final newspaper's mention of potential future ventures, made clear that the story was far from over. William Afton, like the animatronics he'd corrupted, proved remarkably difficult to destroy permanently. Looking back at Five Nights at Freddy's 3, it serves as both a culmination and a transition point. It brought together threads from the previous games, revealing the murderer's identity and fate, while suggesting resolution for his victims. But it also opened new possibilities, showing that even physical destruction might not be enough to end the supernatural curse that had infected Fazbear Entertainment's legacy. The stage was set for the series to explore deeper, stranger territories in its continuing mythology. Childhood Nightmares, Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the fourth mainline installment, arrived with unprecedented speed and fanfare, announced in April of 2015 as the final chapter, with a planned Halloween release. However, Scott Cawthon, known for his rapid development cycles, finished the game early and released it on July 23, 2015, barely 4 months after the third game. This would be the last game for over a year, marking a significant break in the franchise's previously relentless release schedule. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 represented the series' most dramatic departure from its established formula. Gone with the security office, the camera feeds, the mechanical doors, and the pizzeria setting. Instead, players found themselves in a child's bedroom during the night, defending against nightmare versions of the familiar animatronics, creatures so twisted and horrifying that they made the previous game's antagonists look almost benign by comparison. The game's perspective shift was profound. You weren't a night guard, an adult taking a risky job for minimum wage. You were a child, vulnerable and alone in the dark, facing monsters that emerge from the shadows of your own room. Whether these nightmare animatronics were real, or hallucinations born from trauma and fear, or something stranger still, remained deliberately ambiguous, adding to the game's unsettling atmosphere. The gameplay stripped things down to their most primal elements. You move between 3 positions: the bedroom center, where you can look at either of 2 doors, a closet directly opposite, and a bed behind you. The animatronics approach from these 4 directions, and your only defensive tools are a flashlight and your ability to listen carefully. No cameras show their approach. No doors conceal them out permanently. You must move to each location, listen for breathing or movement, and respond appropriately to each threat. The mechanics required split-second timing and nerve-wracking audio cues. At the doors, you can turn on a flashlight to check the hallway beyond. If an animatronic is approaching but hasn't reached the door yet, the light sends them fleeing backward. But if they've already arrived at the threshold when you shine the light, they attack and you die. The only way to know their position is by listening, holding the door closed and waiting for the sound of breathing, raspy and mechanical, indicating they're present. When you hear breathing, you must hold the door shut until the sound stops, only then able to check the hallway safely. The closet requires different handling. Nightmare Foxy uses this route, hiding behind the closet door. You must periodically check on him, shining your flashlight to keep him from fully manifesting. If you neglect the closet, Foxy will emerge fully and attack. But checking it too frequently can also trigger his attack, creating a delicate balance between vigilance and restraint. The bed hosts miniature versions of Freddy, small creatures called Freddles. If you allow 3 of them to gather on the bed, they summon Nightmare Freddy, who attacks from behind. You must periodically return to the bed, shining your flashlight to disperse the Freddles, buying yourself time before the larger threat materializes. The nightmare animatronics themselves represented grotesque amplifications of their original counterparts. Nightmare Freddy's body was torn and tattered, exposing sharp teeth in his chest and stomach. Nightmare Bonnie and Nightmare Chica possessed elongated, spindly fingers ending in sharp points, their bodies twisted and emaciated, their faces pulled into permanent snarls, revealing rows of teeth too numerous for any animal. Their eyes glowed an eerie yellow or white, piercing the darkness with malevolent awareness. Nightmare Foxy, perhaps the most dramatic redesign, barely resembled his original form. His hook had become a massive, jagged blade. His body was shredded, revealing the endoskeleton beneath in ways that suggested violence and decay. His head featured multiple rows of teeth, and when he fully manifested in the closet, he became a towering presence that filled the doorway, all tooth and claw and predatory menace. Nightmare Fredbear, appearing on nights 5 and 6, represented the ultimate threat, approaching from all 4 locations unpredictably, forcing players to constantly move and check, never allowing a moment's rest. His design was particularly haunting. A golden bear with a purple hat and bow tie, his body covered in stitching that made him look pieced together from multiple sources, his teeth impossibly sharp, and his presence somehow more malevolent than the other nightmares combined. Night 7 introduced the aptly named Nightmare, a character who appeared to be a darker, almost skeletal version of Nightmare Fredbear, all black with glowing eyes and teeth. His mechanics combined the worst aspects of all previous threats, creating the game's ultimate challenge. Later updates would add even more extreme difficulties, challenges that pushed players to their absolute limits of reaction time and pattern recognition. The narrative context for these events emerged gradually through gameplay and minigames. Between nights, pixelated cutscenes showed a child's everyday life in 1983, before and during the events that would come to define him. This child, widely identified as the crying child, or the younger brother of Michael Afton, lived in fear of his older brother who wore a foxy mask and bullied him relentlessly, fear of the animatronics at Fredbear's family diner, the precursor to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, fear of the dark itself. The minigames depicted increasingly disturbing scenes. The child locked in a parts and service room with animatronic parts, followed by walking animatronic characters on the street, though whether these were employees in costumes or hallucinations remained unclear. Trapped in a diner bathroom, crying while sounds of celebration and mechanical performance leaked through the door. And finally, the tragic birthday party scene, where his brother and friends, wearing masks of the main animatronics, carried him toward Fredbear as he screamed and struggled. The bite that occurred during this birthday party, as Fredbear's spring-locked jaws closed on the child's head, was depicted in startling, horrific detail through the minigame's simple graphics. The crunch, the child's prone form, the flatline heart monitor visible in later scenes as he lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by plush toys of the characters he'd feared, while an ambiguous voice promised, "I will put you back together." This was the bite of 83, distinct from the bite of 87 mentioned in previous games, showing that these tragic incidents had occurred multiple times in Fazbear Entertainment's history. The connection between the minigames and the main gameplay created interpretive challenges that sparked extensive debate. Was the child experiencing these nightmare animatronic attacks during his coma? Fever dreams induced by trauma? Were these events happening years later to a different character? Perhaps Michael Afton haunted by guilt over his brother's death? Or did the minigames show the past, while the nights depicted something happening concurrently in 2015 or later, with the bedroom being a recreation or experiment? The presence of medical supplies visible in the bedroom, including pills, an IV drip visible through the door, and other pharmaceutical indicators, suggested this might be connected to medical experimentation or treatment. The mechanized breathing sounds when nothing was present, reminiscent of life support equipment, added to the ambiguity. Some theories propose that William Afton, the murderer who'd become Springtrap, was conducting experiments on his surviving son Michael, exposing him to fear using gas-induced hallucinations or recreations of traumatic memories, attempting to understand or replicate supernatural phenomena. The jump scare animations in this game were particularly elaborate and terrifying. Rather than simple static images or brief videos, these sequences showed the nightmare animatronics lunging forward, filling the screen with teeth and glowing eyes, the sound design layered with screams and mechanical grinding that created visceral discomfort. The game leaned into its premise fully, understanding that by removing the pseudo-scientific justification of animatronics malfunctioning and embracing the nightmare aesthetic, it could push horror to more extreme places. Critically, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 received the series' lowest scores, earning 51 on Metacritic. The Escapist and GameZebo highlighted its darker tone and emotional subtext, appreciating the risk of shifting perspectives and settings so dramatically. However, Nick Rowan of Destructoid called the gameplay confusing, finding the audio cues difficult to distinguish and the mechanics less intuitive than previous games. Technical issues on some platforms, particularly mobile devices, also hampered the experience for many players. Despite mixed critical reception, the game's impact on the franchise's lore proved substantial. It introduced the crying child as a tragic figure whose death had profound implications. It showed William Afton as not just a murderer, but someone who would experiment on his own family, pursuing some obsessive goal related to life, death, and possession. It suggested that the nightmares, whether literal or metaphorical, represented trauma passed down through generations of the Afton family. The game's departure from the camera-based security guard formula proved divisive among fans. Some appreciated the freshness, the willingness to completely reimagine what a Five Nights at Freddy's game could be. Others found the audio-based gameplay frustrating, particularly when played without headphones, and missed the strategic element of managing resources like power or ventilation systems that had defined earlier entries. The aesthetic design reached its pinnacle of grotesque creativity with the nightmare animatronics. These weren't just scarier versions of existing characters. They were fundamental reimaginings that emphasized the horrific potential of animatronic characters. Sharp teeth filled every cavity. Claws replaced hands. Proportions stretched to inhuman extremes. The designs communicated that these were creatures born from fear itself, shaped by a child's terror into forms that transcended mere mechanical malfunction. Looking back at Five Nights at Freddy's 4, it stands as perhaps the series' most purely horror-focused entry. Without the structure of camera feeds and defensive systems, without the sci-fi justification of haunted animatronics in a pizzeria, it distilled the franchise to its essence. Vulnerability in darkness, things approaching from just beyond sight, the desperate hope that your reaction will be fast enough when the moment comes. It showed that the series could survive outside the pizzeria setting, opening possibilities for future diversification. The ending's promise to put the crying child back together created expectations that would influence interpretations of later games. The identity of the voice making this promise, whether William Afton, his daughter Elizabeth, or some other entity, remained deliberately ambiguous. But it suggested that death in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe wasn't necessarily final, that consciousness or soul or something else might persist or be reconstructed, foreshadowing the bizarre immortality that would become increasingly central to the franchise's mythology. Underground Darkness, Five Nights at Freddy's, sister location. After the rapid release pace of the first 4 games, Cawthon took his time with the next mainline installment. Five Nights at Freddy's. Sister location was teased in April 2016 with the cryptic tagline, "There was never just one," suggesting the revelation of sister locations to the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Following a trailer release in May, the game launched on Steam on October 7th, 2016, with mobile ports arriving in December for Android and January 2017 for iOS. Sister location represented the most dramatic evolution in the franchise's gameplay to date. Rather than defending a static position, players moved through various rooms of an underground facility, completing tasks while avoiding animatronics that hunted through the same spaces. The change from passive survival to active objective completion fundamentally altered the experience, creating a more narrative-driven, almost adventure game structure within the Five Nights framework. The setting itself was a revelation. Circus Baby's entertainment and rental existed beneath the surface, a facility designed to house and maintain animatronics for private party rental services. This sister location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza featured an entirely new cast of performers: Circus Baby, a red-haired clown animatronic with a childlike voice and sinister intent; Ballora, a ballerina with eyes perpetually closed who navigated via sound; Funtime Freddy, a white and purple bear accompanied by a hand puppet named Bon Bon; and Funtime Foxy, a sleek pink and white performer whose show stage presence concealed deadly purpose. You play as a technician whose identity remains ambiguous through most of the gameplay, though the ending cutscene would later strongly suggest this is Michael Afton, through dialogue about following his father and surviving despite impossible circumstances. Each night brings different assigned tasks, from checking on animatronics to crawling through maintenance spaces to resetting circuit breakers in dark galleries. Hand Unit, an automated voice assistant that provides guidance, greets you with synthetic cheerfulness that grows increasingly ominous as its instructions lead you into progressively more dangerous situations. The first night establishes the routine, using a control panel to deliver mild electric shocks to animatronics, ensuring they remain active and operational. But by night 2, systems fail, power goes out, and Circus Baby herself begins speaking to you directly, warning of the danger posed by the other animatronics and offering guidance through the darkness. Her voice is childlike yet calculating, helpful yet unsettling. And the realization slowly builds that she has her own agenda separate from simply assisting a lost technician. Ballora's gallery provided one of the game's most tense sequences. You must cross her performance space while she dances in the darkness, her music box tune playing as she moves. She detects you through sound, so movement must be careful and deliberate. The advice is to move forward only when her music is playing, staying still when it stops. The darkness is complete, except when flashes of lightning illuminate the gallery, briefly revealing Ballora's form spinning gracefully through the space, her eyes closed, but her awareness perfect. The sequence requires patience and nerve, advancing slowly across an open area where any sudden movement might bring her hunting. Night 3 introduced the spring lock suit mechanic, one of the game's most viscerally uncomfortable sequences. After Funtime Foxy attacks, Circus Baby places you inside a springlock suit for protection. the same type of costume that had killed William Afton in Five Nights at Freddy's 3. As you're sealed inside, Baby explains that these suits are highly dangerous, that the spring locks holding the mechanical components in compressed positions can fail if triggered by moisture or movement. You then must remain absolutely still, watching on monitors as animatronics search the room around you, while the suit's spring locks randomly begin to fail, indicated by red lights on a schematic. The gameplay during this sequence involves clicking to manually wind the spring locks back into position, keeping them from fully snapping closed, while simultaneously watching for animatronic threats on cameras and preparing to hold your breath when they get close. Multiple systems demand attention simultaneously, creating frantic multitasking under intense time pressure. The sequence effectively conveyed why these suits were so dangerous, transforming the horror of William Afton's death from abstract backstory into visceral experience. Night 4 brought possibly the series' most technically demanding challenge. The night guard must crawl through a narrow vent space, while Baby's voice provides directions. But the directions gradually contradict sensory information visible on screen, leading to a minigame where you follow Baby's instructions despite what you see, a test of trust that ends with being trapped in a scooping room. The scooper, a device designed to remove animatronic endoskeletons, sits prominently in the center of the room. Night 5 revealed the truth of what had been building throughout the week. The fun-time animatronics, you discover, have been possessed or inhabited not by child spirits, but by a collective entity called Enard, an amalgamation of all their endoskeletons and AI systems merged into a single tangled consciousness. They've been planning an escape, and they've chosen your body as their vehicle. Circus Baby, who'd seemed helpful, had been manipulating you toward the scooping room all along. The scooper activates. The screen goes dark. Days later, you see yourself at home through the eyes of this now hollow body, skin turning purple and beginning to decay as Enard operates your corpse like a puppet. Eventually, Enard exits your body, crawling away into the sewers, leaving your corpse to collapse. But then, impossibly, you rise. Your eyes open, glowing faintly. In a bathroom mirror, your reflection shows decayed purple skin and inhuman movement. A monologue plays, Michael Afton's voice revealing that he's been following his father's trail, that he should be dead but isn't, that he's going to find William Afton no matter what it takes. This revelation transformed understanding of the entire series. Michael Afton, the older brother who'd accidentally killed his younger sibling in 4, had become an undead entity kept alive by something supernatural, possibly remnant, the same force that bound child spirits to animatronics. His father, William Afton, had sent him to this facility, apparently knowing what would happen, using his own son as bait or tool in some larger scheme. The custom night, unlocked after completing the main story, provided character-specific challenges and cutscenes that filled in additional lore. These scenes showed Circus Baby's creation and testing, her programming specifically designed to attract and abduct children. They depicted the day a young girl, revealed to be Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, approached Baby despite her father's warnings. Baby's abduction mechanism activated, pulling Elizabeth inside where she died, her spirit subsequently possessing the animatronic. The realization that Elizabeth possessed Circus Baby, that William had lost his daughter to his own creation, designed to murder children, added tragic layers to his character, while also raising disturbing questions. Had he designed these animatronics before or after his own child's death? Was Elizabeth's possession an accident or part of his experiments? The custom night revealed that Funtime animatronics were designed specifically for capturing children, with schematics showing storage tanks within their bodies and technical specifications that confirmed their murderous purpose. Critical reception for Sister Location was mixed, earning 62 on Metacritic. Patricia Hernandez of Kotaku called it Cawthon's most ambitious game yet, praising its production values and willingness to dramatically change the formula. William Hughes of the AV Club highlighted the improved mobility and task-based gameplay. However, Angelo D'Argenio of GameCrate argued the difficulty was unbalanced, with each night feeling like its own tutorial rather than building on previous lessons. Rowan criticized Night 4 as a frustrating obstacle that broke the gameplay flow. The voice acting in Sister Location marked a significant step forward for the franchise. Previous games had featured only Phone Guy's recordings, but this game included multiple voice characters with distinct personalities. Heather Masters voiced Circus Baby, with an unsettling mixture of childish innocence and calculating intelligence. Joe Gourdet provided hand units varying levels of helpfulness and frustration as his systems degraded. The production values overall felt more professional and polished than previous entries. The minigames between nights, simpler than in previous games, showed Baby's perspective delivering cupcakes to children in an Atari-style environment. These sequences could be completed in specific ways to unlock different story elements, including a blueprint screen showing the secret design features of the Funtime animatronics that confirmed their purpose as child abduction devices. Looking back at Sister Location, it stands as a pivotal moment in the franchise's evolution. It confirmed the Afton family, William, Michael, Elizabeth, and the unnamed crying child, as central to the overarching narrative, rather than just background figures. It established that William had created animatronics specifically to abduct children, that his murders weren't opportunistic, but premeditated and technologically facilitated. It showed that death in this universe could be temporary or transformed, that bodies could be reanimated, that consciousness could transfer between vessels. The gameplay innovations, while divisive, showed Cawthon continuing to experiment with what a Five Nights at Freddy's game could be. The movement between rooms, the variety of tasks, the more cinematic approach to horror sequences, all suggested the series could sustain itself through reinvention rather than repetition. The increased emphasis on story and character, while potentially at odds with the previous game's environmental storytelling approach, deepened the mythology in ways that would prove essential for future installments. Sister Location also introduced the concept of underground facilities beneath Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, a revelation that would become crucial in later games. The idea that the restaurants on the surface were only part of a larger infrastructure, that William Afton had been conducting experiments and housing dangerous equipment in hidden basements, opened narrative possibilities that would be extensively explored in subsequent entries. The game's darker tone, its willingness to depict body horror, child abduction, and family tragedy more directly than previous entries, marked a maturation of the franchise's themes. While still using mechanical monsters and jump scares as its horror tools, Sister Location engaged more directly with human evil, showing that the true horror wasn't supernatural possession, but the deliberate choices that created the conditions for possession to occur. The Final Fire. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Following Sister Location's October 2016 release, fans waited over a year for the next main installment, the longest gap between releases in the franchise's history to that point. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator arrived on December 4th, 2017. Released as freeware on Steam through an elaborate ruse that initially made it appear to be a Tycoon-style spin-off rather than the sixth mainline game. The deception began immediately. The game opened with an 8-bit minigame where you controlled Freddy Fazbear serving pizza to children, a simple task that glitched out and crashed into a more ominous screen. This screen showed a damaged circus baby illuminated in a dark room, and a cassette tape began playing, a voice welcoming you to your new role in what was clearly not a simple Pizza Tycoon game. The meta-textual bait and switch delighted many fans who thought they were downloading a lighter, more casual Fazbear experience. The game's structure combined Tycoon simulation elements with traditional Five Nights at Freddy's survival horror. During day portions, you managed a pizzeria, purchasing equipment, attractions, and upgrades to increase your restaurant's value and attract customers. You could buy arcade games that featured minigames revealing crucial lore. You accepted sponsorships that provided funds but occasionally triggered loud, distracting advertisements during the night portions. You attempted to build a successful restaurant, reaching performance metrics that would unlock progression. But the real purpose of your pizzeria ran deeper than profit. Each day, you had the opportunity to salvage animatronics found in the back alley. These salvage sequences presented you with a damaged animatronic secured in a chair, and you were instructed to test various systems and ask questions while the animatronic remained presumably inactive. However, they were far from inactive. Audio cues indicated when they were preparing to attack, and you had to watch a simple animation progress bar while simultaneously listening for warnings, clicking a button to administer a mild shock when you detected movement. The 4 salvageable animatronics were all familiar yet transformed. Molten Freddy appeared as a tangle of wires and endoskeleton parts, possessed by the combined remnants of the original child spirits from the first game's Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Scrap Baby was Circus Baby rebuilt after being ejected from Enard, Elizabeth Afton's spirit still trapped within. Scrap Trap was William Afton again, having survived the fire at Fazbear's Fright and rebuilt himself into a new, more decayed spring Bonnie suit. And Lefty, a black bear with a red color scheme, was actually a trap designed to contain the puppet, Charlie Emily's spirit, drawing her in and capturing her. Each salvaged animatronic could be declined, sent away for a small payment, or accepted into your pizzeria for a significantly larger reward. But accepting them meant they'd be active during the night, hunting you through the building. The optimal strategy for completing the game actually required salvaging all 4, drawing every vengeful spirit and corrupted entity into one place. The night portions returned to familiar Five Nights mechanics with new twists. You sat at a computer handling paperwork and tasks, but you had to monitor vents for animatronic intrusions, using motion detectors to see their locations, audio lures to mislead them, and a controlled ventilation system to manage noise and temperature. Unlike previous games, you couldn't directly prevent attacks. You could only misdirect and delay, hoping to survive until 6 in the morning when your shift ended. The tension built differently than in earlier games. The animatronics moved during the day portion as well, meaning your restaurant construction and salvage sequences occurred while murderous machines stalked the building around you. The knowledge that every animatronic you salvaged added another threat to survive created a risk-reward calculation that went beyond simple gameplay difficulty. The story unfolded through a series of audio recordings played during night portions, cassette tapes found hidden in your office. A voice eventually revealed to be Henry Emily, the other co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment and father of the murdered Charlie, explained his plan and his regrets. He'd built this pizzeria as a trap, designed to lure in every cursed animatronic, every corrupted remnant of William Afton's crimes, including Afton himself. The building had been constructed with a specific purpose: to burn. Night 6 revealed the truth. Rather than starting another shift, the building began to overheat. Henry's voice played one final message, addressing each entity in turn. He spoke to Elizabeth, apologizing that she'd been trapped by her own father's creation, promising to free her now. He addressed the children's spirits in Molten Freddy, promising them rest after years of confusion and pain. He acknowledged the employee who'd gathered these entities, referring to them as someone brave enough to volunteer for this ending, prompting widespread interpretation that this was Michael Afton finally achieving peace after his long undead existence. And he addressed William Afton directly, damning him, promising that this fire would finally end his existence, that he would not be allowed to continue his twisted pursuits any longer. The screen showed flames consuming the building as temperature readouts climbed higher. Henry's speech reached its conclusion, explaining that he'd remain close by to ensure no one escaped this time, that he would share their fate because his own work in creating the technology Afton exploited had contributed to these tragedies. The fire burned everything, reducing the pizzeria and its contents to ash. The game offered multiple endings based on completion percentage. The bad ending showed nothing resolved, animatronic's eyes still glowing in darkness. The good ending, achieved by completing hidden tasks within the arcade minigames, displayed a graveyard scene with 6 gravestones bearing names revealed through the minigames: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, and Charlotte. The spirits of the murdered children, finally freed from their mechanical prisons, could rest. A 7th gravestone, unmarked, stood slightly apart, suggesting Henry Emily's final resting place. The secret lawkeeper ending, unlocked by finding all 3 hidden minigames, provided the clearest view of the graveyard, with Charlie's grave positioned on a hill overlooking the others, maintaining her protective watch even in death. This ending implied that the main cast of spirits, at least, had found peace through this final purification by fire. The minigames themselves contained crucial lore revelations. Midnight Motorist showed a dark, rainy night where a mysterious figure drove home, arrived to find someone had left through a window, and discovered a person watching television, angry and violent. The sequence suggested William Afton's home life, possibly showing Michael running away, or the crying child being forced to stay home while Elizabeth disappeared at Circus Baby's Pizza World. Fruity Maze depicted Susie, the child who'd become Chica, being lured away from an arcade game by a figure in a yellow Spring Bonnie suit. Security Puppet showed Charlie locked outside Freddy's during a rainstorm, the puppet attempting to reach her but shutting down due to water damage, lying beside her body as her spirit transferred to the animatronic. Critically, Pizzeria Simulator received praise for its genre-blending approach. Rock, Paper, Shotgun and Game Crate applauded how it combined business simulation with survival horror, creating a unique experience that felt fresh despite being the 6th mainline game. The free release also garnered appreciation, though mobile and console ports would later charge for the experience. The game's significance to the franchise's narrative cannot be overstated. It provided closure for the main story arc that had begun in 2014, freeing the child spirits and apparently destroying William Afton for good. Henry Emily's emergence as an active character rather than background lore figure gave the story a protagonist working to undo the damage Afton had caused. The revelation that Henry had been planning this final confrontation, that the entire pizzeria was a constructed trap rather than an organic business, reframed the entire experience as a deliberate endgame. The gameplay balance between tycoon elements and survival created a unique rhythm. Building during the day, surviving through the night. The two modes complementing each other as your restaurant's success depended on surviving to see it grow. The salvage sequences provided some of the most tense moments in the series. Sitting mere feet from a killer animatronic, shocking them into submission while trying to complete a simple task, never certain whether their next movement would be their last. Looking back at Pizzeria Simulator, it functioned as an intended ending point for the franchise's original story. The child victims found peace. Henry Emily completed his redemption arc. William Afton faced judgment for his crimes. Michael Afton received the release of death after years of undead torment. The cycle that began with murders in the 1980s finally concluded in what appeared to be the late 2000 teens or early 2020s. But as the franchise had taught fans repeatedly, endings in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe were rarely absolute. Death itself proved malleable. Spirits persisted beyond their vessels, and William Afton had already survived impossibilities before. The fire burned, the building collapsed, but even as this chapter closed, seeds had been planted for the story to continue in unexpected directions. Eternal Torment, Ultimate Custom Night. On February 16, 2018, Scott Cawthon announced plans for a free update to Pizzeria Simulator. The community voted between two options: an endless tycoon mode or an ultimate custom night featuring numerous characters. The overwhelming response favored the custom night, and Cawthon began development immediately. As the scope of his vision expanded, he realized the project had become too large for a simple update. On May 30th, he announced Ultimate Custom Night would release as a standalone game, arriving on June 27th, 2018. Ultimate Custom Night served as both a celebration of the franchise and a glimpse into William Afton's possible fate beyond physical death. The game featured 50 animatronic characters drawn from across the entire series, each with unique mechanics and behaviors, allowing players to customize the difficulty by adjusting individual AI levels from 0 to 20. The resulting combinations created nearly infinite challenge variations, catering to both casual players seeking manageable experiences and masochists pursuing maximum difficulty. The character roster represented a comprehensive history of the franchise. The original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy returned with their classic behaviors updated for this new context. The toy animatronics from the second game brought their characteristic speed and aggression. Nightmare versions of characters from the fourth game introduced new attack patterns. The Funtime animatronics from Sister Location required attention to specific mechanics. Springtrap from the third game, now appearing in his Scraptrap form, moved through the office with deadly intent. Even characters from Pizzeria Simulator and more obscure lore elements appeared, creating a who's who of Five Nights at Freddy's antagonists. Each animatronic possessed distinct mechanics that forced players to juggle multiple tasks simultaneously. Freddy required checking cameras to prevent his approach. Foxy needed to be periodically flashed with a hallway light, or he'd rush the office. The Music Man would activate if the player made too much noise. Balloon Boy could disable flashlight functionality if allowed to enter the office. Mangle dropped from the ceiling, requiring reaction to audio cues. The puppet appeared if a music box wasn't wound. Golden Freddy manifested randomly, requiring immediate response to avoid instant death. Managing all 50 at maximum difficulty represented one of gaming's most punishing challenges. The screen would fill with visual and audio warnings, multiple threats converging simultaneously, the player forced to prioritize which danger to address first, while hoping their decisions left enough margin to handle the next crisis. The mastery required to survive even a few minutes at maximum difficulty became legendary within the community. The game featured multiple office layouts from previous games, allowing players to experience different environments with varying sightlines and available tools. The original office from Five Nights at Freddy's 1, with its iconic doors and limited power. The doorless office from 2, with its Freddy mask defense. The vent and audio systems set up from 3. Each office required adapting strategies based on available defensive options. Cutscenes unlocked through completing specific challenges revealed fragments of lore. The mediocre Melody's animatronics, characters that appeared in Pizzeria Simulator, would occasionally deliver cryptic messages. One cutscene showed a drowning ball pit with arms reaching up, referencing lore that would become significant in future installments. Another depicted Old Man Consequences fishing by a peaceful lake, advising someone to rest their own soul, implying that continuing the cycle of vengeance and torment served no purpose. The true narrative significance of Ultimate Custom Night emerged through careful analysis of these details, though much of this remains in the realm of interpretation rather than explicit confirmation. The prevailing theory suggests the setting isn't a physical location, that William Afton isn't actually experiencing these attacks in real time. Instead, this could represent Afton's personal hell, a purgatory constructed by one of his victims to torment him eternally. The vengeful spirit, identified through various clues and voice lines as potentially being Cassidy. The child theorized to possess Golden Freddy may have refused to let Afton rest, where other victims found peace in Pizzeria Simulator's fire. This interpretation suggests Cassidy constructed this nightmare, forcing Afton to relive being hunted by his own creations in an endless loop. This interpretation gained support from dialogue and environmental details. Golden Freddy's appearance with voice lines suggesting personal vendetta. The one "you should not have killed" imagery that some connect to Cassidy specifically. The impossibility of surviving indefinitely, ensuring Afton would eventually fail and face the jump scares again and again. Based on these elements, many in the community read the game as representing not a literal event, but a metaphysical state. William Afton's consciousness trapped after death, unable to move on, tortured by the very evil he'd unleashed. This reading aligns with certain story beats, but remains ultimately an interpretation of deliberately ambiguous content. The connections to the Fazbear Frights book series, particularly the story The Man in Room 1280, supported this reading. In that tale, a burn victim in a coma, heavily implied to be Afton, is kept alive by a vengeful spirit despite his body's attempts to die. The entity won't let him go, forcing him to endure agony as punishment for his crimes. Ultimate Custom Night functioned as a gaming equivalent of this eternal torment, a hell custom built for a child murderer by one of his victims. Critically, Ultimate Custom Night received praise for its mechanical depth and content density. PC Gamer described it as an inventive twist on the franchise's gameplay loop. The sheer variety of challenges and the customization options provided effectively limitless content for dedicated players. Challenge modes with preset difficulties and character selections added structure for those overwhelmed by 50 simultaneous threats. The voice acting expanded significantly, with many animatronics receiving spoken lines that revealed personality and lore. Some were threatening, others bizarre, a few seemingly sympathetic. The voice lines added character depth while also serving gameplay functions, alerting players to specific threats or providing audio cues for timing defensive actions. The game's existence as a celebration of the franchise's history allowed it to sidestep the narrative pressure of advancing the main story. This was a retrospective, a greatest hits compilation designed to reward long-time fans while punishing them mechanically. The inclusion of characters from every era of Five Nights at Freddy's created a sense of culmination. A final exam testing everything players had learned across 6 years and multiple games. Looking back at Ultimate Custom Night, it serves as both a conclusion and a transition point. For players who accepted Pizzeria Simulator as the story's end, this game provided a definitive fate for William Afton, eternal suffering at the hands of his victims. But for those who knew Cawthon's tendency to continue stories beyond their apparent endings, the game also functioned as a holding pattern, keeping Afton occupied in the afterlife, while the franchise evolved in new directions in the physical world. The game demonstrated that Five Nights at Freddy's had achieved sufficient cultural penetration and mechanical variety to support a purely gameplay-focused entry. Not every installment needed to advance the main plot or introduce new lore mysteries. Sometimes, simply providing a playground where players could test themselves against the franchise's accumulated menagerie of horrors was enough. The game's free release and ongoing popularity cemented its position as a fan favorite despite its lack of story progression. Virtual reality terror. Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted. The franchise entered a new era on May 28, 2019, when Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted, launched for Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and PlayStation VR. This marked the first game developed in collaboration with Steel Wool Studios, a professional game development company, rather than as a solo project by Scott Cawthon. The shift to virtual reality represented the series' most dramatic technological leap, transforming the experience from viewing horror through a screen to being physically present within haunted spaces. Help Wanted's premise brilliantly integrated the franchise's real-world history into its fictional universe. Within the game's lore, the Five Nights at Freddy's games that players had been enjoying since 2014 were revealed to be propaganda created by Fazbear Entertainment to discredit the actual tragedies that had occurred. The corporation commissioned an indie developer to make games mocking their dark history, turning real murders and supernatural hauntings into subjects of entertainment, thereby making anyone who claimed these events were real seem as though they were simply too immersed in video game lore. Fazbear Entertainment then hired a game development company, identified as Silver Parasol Games within the fiction, to create the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience, a VR game that would further normalize and trivialize the franchise's horrific past. This game within a game was what players were actually experiencing when they launched Help Wanted, creating a meta-narrative layer that blurred the boundaries between the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise as a real phenomenon and as a fictional universe. The gameplay consisted of dozens of minigames and experiences drawn from previous entries in the series. Players could experience recreations of nights from Five Nights at Freddy's 1, 2, and 3, now rendered in 3 dimensions and experienced from within the actual security offices rather than viewing them on a flat screen. The jump scares, already terrifying on monitors, became visceral in VR, animatronics lunging toward you from mere inches away, filling your entire field of vision with teeth and metal. New minigames added variety beyond simple recreations. Parts and service challenges had you performing maintenance on animatronics following recorded instructions. Tasks that would suddenly go wrong as the robots activated unexpectedly. Dark rooms required navigating pitch-black spaces with only a flashlight. Searching for specific items while plush babies, small aggressive animatronics, threatened from the shadows. Vent repair had you crawling through claustrophobic passages while Mangle pursued. Prize counter challenged you to hand out prizes to children, while Plush Trap attempted to jump scare you from a corner. The hub area, a virtual showroom where you selected which experiences to play, featured an audio-only character called Tape Girl. Cassette tapes hidden throughout the games revealed her story. She'd been a beta tester for the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience and had discovered something wrong with the game's code. The development team had scanned old circuit boards from actual Fazbear Entertainment animatronics to accelerate development, bringing authentic components into the digital recreation. But something had come with those circuit boards, transferred from the physical remnants into the virtual space. An entity tape girl called Glitch Trap, a digital consciousness that appeared as a person in a crude Spring Bonnie costume. This entity sought to escape the game, to transfer its consciousness into players who spent too much time within the experience. Tape Girl's tapes documented her attempts to fragment Glitch Trap's code by recording pieces of it onto separate tapes, hoping to prevent it from fully manifesting. Her final tape suggested she'd failed, that Glitch Trap had already begun possessing someone. The main game's hidden objectives involved collecting these tapes, but doing so allowed Glitch Trap to appear with increasing frequency. You'd glimpse him watching from windows, standing in corners, drawing closer each time you encountered him. His appearance, a crudely sewn rabbit costume with a blank stare, proved deeply unsettling. Lacking the mechanical precision of animatronics, while possessing an awareness that suggested intelligence behind the costume. The pizza party level represented Glitch Trap's trap. Designed as a celebration, it lured the player through a recreation of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location to a back room where Glitch Trap performed the murders that had defined the franchise's history. The player was grabbed, stuffed into a Freddy suit in a grotesque recreation of the original children's fate, becoming Glitch Trap's latest victim. The connections between this sequence and William Afton's known crimes, combined with later story developments, led to the widespread interpretation that this entity represented some form of Afton, whether his literal consciousness, a digital echo of his memories and evil, or an AI constructed from his behavior patterns. Having survived in the circuit boards and transferred to the VR game, finding a new medium for his twisted existence. The revelation that Glitch Trap appeared to be some form of Afton, whether his literal consciousness or an AI constructed from his memories and behavior patterns, suggested the pizzeria simulator fire hadn't achieved its goal of complete destruction. Physical destruction had seemingly only forced this entity to evolve, to abandon flesh and mechanical shells for code and digital space, becoming something that could propagate through networks and infect new hosts. This interpretation would face complications and revisions as later games introduced the Mimic, creating ongoing debates about which entity was which and what role Afton's actual consciousness played in these digital manifestations. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC, released in October 2019, expanded the game with Halloween-themed content set around the 1983 Fall Festival referenced in other lore. Players faced new challenges, including Dreadbear, a grotesque Frankenstein's monster version of Freddy, and Grim Foxy, a Reaper-like figure. The DLC's highlight was a corn maze where players collected keys while being hunted, ultimately leading to the construction of a mask, the Vanny mask, a white rabbit face with red accents. This mask would prove crucial to understanding the game's impact on future installments. The player character, later identified as Vanessa, had been testing the VR game and assembling Glitchtrap's code through collecting the tapes. The creation of the Vanny mask represented her complete transformation into Glitchtrap's follower, a physical manifestation of her corruption. She became what would later be called the reluctant follower, her will subverted by Afton's digital presence, turned into an agent for his schemes in the physical world. Critically, Help Wanted's VR version received strong praise, particularly the PlayStation version, which earned an 80 on Metacritic. Critics appreciated how effectively Five Nights at Freddy's translated to virtual reality, the inherent presence of VR amplifying the series' horror to new levels. The immersion created by physically looking around offices, reaching out to press buttons, and experiencing jump scares as full-body assaults, rather than screen events, enhanced every element that had made the flat games effective. The production values marked a significant leap forward for the franchise. Steel Wool Studios brought professional development expertise, creating environments with lighting, texture, and detail far beyond what Cawthon had achieved working solo. The animatronics looked more realistic, moving with fluid animation and sophisticated behavior AI. The sound design utilized spatial audio to create directional cues that worked brilliantly in VR headsets. A flat-screen version of the game, released for players without VR equipment, maintained the core content, but inevitably lost some of the impact. Experiencing these scenes on a monitor reduced them to something closer to previous Five Nights games. Effective, but lacking the visceral immediacy of the VR experience. Nevertheless, the flat version allowed the game to reach a wider audience and kept the franchise accessible to fans who hadn't invested in VR hardware. Looking back at Help Wanted, it represented a successful reinvention of the franchise for a new technological paradigm. Rather than simply porting existing games to VR, Steel Wool Studios and Cawthon created an experience that understood VR's unique strengths and terrors. The meta-narrative about Fazbear Entertainment using games to discredit real tragedies added a layer of commentary on how corporations manage public relations nightmares. More significantly, Help Wanted introduced Glitchtrap and set the stage for the franchise's next major story arc, where Pizzeria Simulator concluded the saga of the physical animatronics and the trapped child spirits. Help Wanted showed that the horror could evolve, that William Afton's evil could adapt to new mediums, that the cycle of corruption and violence could continue in digital space and infect new victims. The stage was set for the franchise to move into the modern era, exploring themes of technology, consciousness, and the nature of evil in a networked world. Augmented horror, Five Nights at Freddy's AR, special delivery. While Steel Wool Studios developed Help Wanted, Scott Cawthon simultaneously worked with Illumix, a California-based augmented reality gaming company, on another experimental entry in the franchise. Five Nights at Freddy's AR, special delivery launched on November 25th, 2019, for both iOS and Android devices. bringing animatronic horrors into players' actual physical environments through smartphone cameras. The premise drew from Help Wanted's concept of Fazbear Entertainment, attempting to normalize their brand through technology. Within the game's fiction, the corporation had launched the Fazbear Funtime service, a subscription program that would deliver animatronic entertainment directly to customers' homes for parties and events. Of course, something had gone wrong. A recurring theme for Fazbear Entertainment, and the animatronics had malfunctioned, becoming hostile and hunting their supposed clients. The gameplay utilized augmented reality to overlay digital animatronics onto real-world spaces viewed through your phone's camera. You'd receive alerts that an animatronic was being dispatched to your location, and then the hunt began. The animatronic would circle your position, sometimes visible in your camera view, but often invisible, indicated only by visual distortion effects and audio cues. You had to track its position by sound and occasional glimpses, shining your flashlight on it when it appeared to prevent its approach. If it successfully got close enough, it would attack with a jump scare visible in your actual environment, the animatronic appearing to exist in your kitchen or living room or wherever you were playing. Each animatronic possessed unique behavior patterns requiring different strategies. Freddy's approach could be detected through static interference increasing as he got closer. Chica's movement triggered kitchen sounds and cooking audio. Foxy ran at you directly once spotted, requiring a shock from your device's taser function before he could reach you. Ballora navigated by sound, forcing you to move carefully and silently, lest you alert her to your position. The game featured a social mechanic, where players could send animatronics to attack their friends' accounts, creating a networked experience where threats could come from other players' actions rather than just AI encounters. Defeating animatronics earned parts and mods that could be used to customize your own animatronic roster, building more powerful versions to send against others. Seasonal events and limited-time animatronics kept the content fresh. Holiday-themed variants appeared throughout the year. Jacko Bonnie and Jacko Chica for Halloween. Freddy Frostbear for winter holidays. Event characters featured unique animations and attack patterns, encouraging players to engage regularly to collect the full roster. Some animatronics could only be obtained through lucky encounters or by purchasing them through the game's monetization system. The augmented reality technology proved impressively sophisticated for a mobile game. The animatronics appeared to understand the space around you, moving behind furniture, approaching from different angles, creating the illusion they existed in your environment, rather than simply being overlaid on camera footage. The integration of spatial audio meant you could hear them circling you even when they weren't visible, the sound moving naturally as you turned your phone and changed perspective. Lore content arrived through email messages from various Fazbear Entertainment employees, computer screens that revealed corporate communications, and occasional anomalous characters. Springtrap appeared as a heavily damaged version of his Scraptrap form, suggesting he'd survived Pizzeria Simulator's fire yet again. His presence implied that Fazbear Entertainment had somehow acquired his remains and incorporated them into their delivery service. An astoundingly dangerous decision, even by their negligent standards. The game's connection to Help Wanted manifested through Vanessa's presence. The player could unlock emails from her Fazbear Entertainment account, revealing her descent into Glitchtrap's control. Her communications grew increasingly erratic, searching for ways to induce compliance in subjects. Encrypted messages suggesting coordination with the entity possessing her. The game showed Glitchtrap's influence spreading beyond the VR experience, infecting actual Fazbear Entertainment operations as Vanessa carried out his instructions in the physical world. Critical reception for special delivery was mixed, with technical performance issues plaguing early versions. The game demanded significant processing power for augmented reality, causing lag and overheating on many devices. Battery drain proved severe, limiting play sessions. The monetization system, while allowing free-to-play access, heavily encouraged purchasing premium currency to acquire specific animatronics and resources, creating friction with the franchise's fan base accustomed to fully featured paid experiences. The game's live service model meant constant updates and changes, with new characters and events arriving regularly through 2020 and into 2021. However, support eventually waned, and on March 14, 2024, the game's servers were permanently shut down, ending its run after over 4 years of operation. Players who'd built extensive rosters and collected rare variants lost access to content they'd invested time and money acquiring, highlighting the impermanence of online-dependent games. Despite its eventual closure, special delivery represented an interesting experiment in bringing Five Nights at Freddy's to augmented reality. The concept of animatronics appearing in your actual living space, prowling your home or office, created a different flavor of horror than the franchise's typical confined space survival. The game proved that the series' mechanical monsters remained frightening even when rendered in AR, rather than traditional 3D graphics or static camera feeds. The lore contributions, particularly the continued tracking of Vanessa's corruption and Springtrap's survival, maintained narrative continuity between Help Wanted and what would eventually become Security Breach. The game functioned as a bridge, showing how Glitchtrap's influence spread from the VR experience into actual Fazbear entertainment operations, setting up his eventual plan to infiltrate and control the Mega Pizzaplex. Looking back at Special Delivery, it stands as a technological experiment that partially succeeded. The core concept worked effectively when the technology cooperated, creating genuinely unnerving encounters with animatronics in familiar spaces. But the limitations of mobile hardware and the live service structure that required constant internet connectivity, and eventually led to complete loss of access to content, proved that some gaming experiences work better as standalone products than as ongoing services. The Mega Pizzaplex, Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach. After years of smaller-scale entries and experiments with VR and AR, the franchise returned to a full-scale 3D game with Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach, released on December 16, 2021, for Windows, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. Developed by Steel Wool Studios, with a significantly larger budget and scope than previous entries, Security Breach represented the series' most ambitious technical undertaking. A free-roam survival horror game set in a massive entertainment complex with dozens of interconnected areas to explore. The setting itself dwarfed anything the franchise had attempted before. Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex was a sprawling mall-like structure containing attractions, restaurants, arcade areas, bowling alleys, go-kart racing tracks, golf courses, daycare centers, and performance stages. The sheer size of the complex allowed for genuine exploration and discovery, rather than simply viewing areas through camera feeds. The game abandoned the series' traditional static survival approach entirely in favor of open-area stealth and evasion gameplay. You play as Gregory, a young homeless boy, who'd somehow ended up trapped inside the Pizzaplex after closing time. During a performance by the glam rock band, the game's updated versions of the classic animatronics, the lead singer glam rock Freddy had malfunctioned and collapsed on stage. Gregory, who'd been hiding in Freddy's stomach hatch to avoid security, found himself protected by the one animatronic in the building who wasn't trying to capture him. The other glam rock animatronics, glam rock Chica with her bright pink and yellow body, Roxanne Wolf with her competitive personality and racing theme, and Montgomery Gator with his rock star aggression, all hunted Gregory through the complex. Unlike previous games where animatronics simply attacked on sight, these characters possessed distinct personalities and patrol patterns, calling out for Gregory, expressing frustration when they lost track of him, exhibiting behavior that felt more like intelligent pursuit than simple programmed aggression. Glamrock Freddy functioned as Gregory's protector and mobile hiding spot. You could enter Freddy's chest cavity to avoid detection, and Freddy would carry you through areas while providing cover. However, Freddy required periodic recharging at stations throughout the complex, creating a resource management element where you had to balance the safety Freddy provided against the need to find power before he shut down. Freddy's characterization as gentle and protective, concerned for Gregory's safety and willing to help despite his programming, created an emotional anchor for the story. The game progressed through a series of 1-hour increments rather than traditional nights. Each hour until 6 in the morning brought new objectives and areas to explore. The gameplay loop involved reaching specific locations, solving environmental puzzles, finding collectibles that revealed lore, and evading or occasionally defeating animatronic threats. The shift to free roam navigation meant you could often choose routes and strategies, finding hiding spots in photo booths or underneath counters, distracting animatronics with noisemakers, or simply running when detected. Vanessa, the security guard players had been tracking since Help Wanted, appeared as a major antagonist. She patrolled the Pizzaplex with a flashlight, searching for Gregory, her behavior erratic and obsessive. The game implied she'd been fully corrupted by Glitchtrap, though it remained ambiguous whether she maintained any autonomy or had become a complete puppet for Afton's digital consciousness. Occasionally, she appeared as Vanny, wearing the white rabbit mask from Help Wanted's DLC, in this form becoming even more aggressive and dangerous. DJ Music Man provided one of the game's most memorable chase sequences. This massive spider-like animatronic, too large to fit through normal corridors, pursued Gregory through a maintenance area, while the player desperately tried to reach safety. His size and the thundering sound of his movements created visceral panic as he crashed through obstacles in relentless pursuit. The daycare area introduced Sun and Moon, a single animatronic with split personalities based on whether lights were on or off. Sun, active in the bright daycare, was friendly but overly enthusiastic about keeping the lights on, becoming frantic when power began to fail. When darkness fell, Moon emerged, a predatory version who hunted Gregory through the shadows. The sequence required keeping generators running while navigating a play structure, creating tension through light management, rather than simply fleeing or hiding. The game featured multiple endings based on choices and completion percentage. The bad endings had Gregory leaving the Pizzaplex by 6 in the morning, escaping but leaving mysteries unresolved. These endings showed him homeless in an alley with a newspaper suggesting Vanessa had been arrested, or that the Pizzaplex continued operating with disturbing implications. One ending showed Gregory and Freddy driving away in a van, escaping together but without addressing the source of the corruption. The Burn Trap ending, requiring significant exploration to unlock, took Gregory and Freddy deep beneath the Pizzaplex, into the ruins of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, the location from Pizzeria Simulator that the mall had been built atop. There they discovered a massive blob of tangled animatronic parts, seemingly the remains of Molten Freddy, and Burn Trap, a partially burned animatronic body kept in a charging station. At the time, this was interpreted as William Afton, having survived and rebuilt himself yet again, though later revelations about the mimic would complicate this reading, raising questions about whether this was actually Afton or the mimic mimicking his appearance and behavior. A confrontation ensued where Gregory attempted to burn the entity once more, using the same solution Henry Emily had tried years earlier. The true ending, called the Princess Quest ending, and widely accepted as canon based on later story developments in Ruin and Help Wanted 2, required completing 3 hidden arcade games throughout the Pizzaplex. These games depicted a princess fighting through a digital realm, ultimately confronting and defeating a glitchy rabbit entity. Completing the final Princess Quest arcade freed Vanessa from Glitchtrap's control, severing whatever hold existed on her consciousness. The ending showed Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy's head, the rest of his body having been destroyed in the confrontation, together outside the Pizzaplex at sunrise, suggesting a path toward recovery and healing. The interpretation of this as the canonical outcome stems primarily from how subsequent games reference and build upon this conclusion. Critical reception for Security Breach was mixed, earning an average score around 60 on Metacritic. Praise focused on the game's ambition, visual design, and atmosphere. The Pizzaplex felt like a real location with impressive lighting and environmental detail. The glamrock animatronics designs were praised as fresh takes on classic characters. The expanded scope and open exploration offered a welcome change from the series' traditional format. However, significant technical issues plagued the release. Bugs caused game-breaking glitches where players fell through floors, animatronics behaved erratically, and progression-blocking problems forced restarts. Performance on base PlayStation 4 consoles suffered with severe frame rate drops. The story's ending ambiguity and the challenge of finding the true ending without guides frustrated many players. Critics noted that the game felt rushed, possibly released before it was truly ready, with patches over subsequent months addressing some but not all of the technical problems. The shift from tight, focused horror to open-world exploration proved divisive. Some players appreciated the freedom and variety, enjoying the ability to explore and discover rather than enduring static survival challenges. Others felt the change sacrificed the series' identity, that the stealth gameplay lacked the strategic tension of resource management in confined spaces, that the horror had been diluted in favor of adventure game mechanics. Looking back at Security Breach, it represents both an ambitious evolution and a stumbling point for the franchise. The attempt to modernize Five Nights at Freddy's for the OLA gaming space, to create a large-scale production with cinematic sequences and expanded gameplay, was admirable and partially successful. The Pizzaplex itself was a memorable setting, and moments like the DJ Music Man chase or the daycare sequence showed the team could create effective horror in this new format. But the technical execution faltered, and the story's fragmented delivery through multiple endings and missable content meant many players never experienced the intended narrative conclusion. The game proved that Steel Wool Studios could create impressive environments and mechanics, but that managing a project of this scope exceeded their resources at the time, leading to a final product that felt compromised despite its ambition. Ruin and Revelation. Security Breach. DLC. On May 30th, 2022, Steel Wool Studios announced free DLC for Security Breach titled Ruin, finally releasing it on July 25th, 2023, over a year and a half after the base game. The delay allowed time for extensive bug fixing and improvements to Security Breach itself, while also ensuring the DLC received proper polish, learning from the base game's troubled launch. Ruin shifted perspective to a new character, Cassie, a young girl who received a distress call from Gregory, claiming he was trapped in the Pizzaplex and needed help. Despite the complex being abandoned and in ruins, overrun with vegetation and falling apart from months or years of neglect, Cassie ventured inside to rescue her friend, demonstrating a loyalty that would be tested by the journey's revelations. The game provided players with the Vanny Mask, a virtual reality augmented security device that overlaid digital information onto the real world. Through the mask, Cassie could see things invisible to the naked eye, virtual security nodes that needed deactivating, hidden paths marked by AR indicators, and most importantly, the difference between physical reality and digital deception. This mechanic brilliantly incorporated AR concepts into a traditional game, creating moments where removing the mask revealed the true state of the environment, often far more decayed and dangerous than the digital overlay suggested. The glam rock animatronics had become even more nightmarish in decay. Chica's body was shattered, her endoskeleton exposed, yet she still hunted through the wreckage. Roxy had lost her eyes, moving blind but no less dangerous, navigating by sound with desperate, pained voice lines that suggested some awareness remained of her degraded state. Monty's appearance in the ruins, heavily damaged but still mobile, created tense encounters in flooded areas where he lunged from murky water. The game introduced new threats as well. The ruined animatronics, variants of familiar characters in states of extreme decay, featured redesigns that emphasized the passage of time and neglect. The entity, a digital consciousness manifesting through the Vanny network, took various forms, including a glitchy rabbit that stalked Cassie through virtual spaces, revealed to be the mimic manipulating security systems and Gregory's voice to lure her deeper into the complex. The revelation of the mimic as the true antagonist connected to lore that extended beyond the games themselves into the Tales from the Pizzaplex book series, where its backstory received more complete exploration. According to these supplementary materials, the mimic was an advanced AI endoskeleton created in the 1980s, designed to learn behaviors through observation and copy them. Its history, as told through these books, involved tragedy, violence, and eventual abandonment, leading to its being sealed in concrete beneath what would become the Pizzaplex. The game itself provides limited direct explanation, relying on players' familiarity with these external sources to understand the full context of what the mimic is and why it behaves as it does. The Eclipse character, a merged form of sun and moon, provided one of the DLC's most touching moments. After Cassie repaired the daycare attendant, the two personalities harmonized into Eclipse, who thanked her for helping him become whole and gently assisted rather than threatening. This brief interaction showed that some animatronics, even damaged ones, could still access their original helpful programming when given the chance. The confrontation with the mimic came deep below the Pizzaplex, in the ruins of the Pizzeria Simulator location. There, Cassie deactivated the final security nodes and unwittingly freed the mimic from the concrete prison that had held it. The creature's appearance, an empty endoskeleton that moved with unsettling fluidity, wearing ragged costumes it scavenged, proved deeply disturbing. A predator that could become anything by simply changing its outer shell. The ending proved devastating and deliberately ambiguous. As Cassie attempted to escape via an elevator after freeing the mimic, a voice that sounded like the real Gregory came through, apologizing and saying he couldn't risk the mimic reaching the surface. The elevator cables were cut, sending Cassie plummeting into darkness. Whether this was actually Gregory making an impossible choice to sacrifice his friend for the greater good, or the mimic continuing its vocal deception to further torment Cassie, or perhaps some third explanation entirely, remained deliberately unclear. The screen cutting to black with Roxy's voice calling out for Cassie in the distance. The game provided no definitive answer to this crucial question, leaving players to interpret the tragedy based on their reading of the characters and situation. The alternate endings added further uncertainty. In one, a scooper machine grabbed the mimic and dragged it away while Cassie escaped, suggesting the facility had automated defenses still functional. Another showed Cassie achieving some measure of peace through a Vanny mask-induced hallucination, standing on a peaceful hill with Vanessa and Helpy releasing balloons. A merciful illusion before something terrible happened. The ambiguity of Cassie's fate, whether she survived the fall or died in the depths, became a source of intense speculation. Critical reception for Ruin proved significantly more positive than Security Breach's base game. Reviews praised the tighter focus, improved performance, and more coherent narrative. The DLC felt like what Security Breach should have been, a manageable scope executed with polish, learning from the base game's mistakes. The Vanny Mask mechanic created memorable moments of reality versus perception horror. The degraded animatronics were genuinely unsettling in ways the polished glamrocks hadn't been. The revelation from Ruin that the mimic, rather than glitch trap or burn trap, served as the primary threat beneath the Pizzaplex, complicated Security Breach's story considerably. The initial interpretation that burn trap represented William Afton's final form faced challenges from the mimic's introduction. Some readings suggest the mimic had been manipulating events, mimicking Afton's behavior patterns because it had observed them, creating the appearance of Afton's return, while being a different entity entirely. Other interpretations propose multiple distinct entities, perhaps Glitch Trap as an Afton-based AI, the Mimic as a separate learning machine, and Burn Trap as something else altogether. The relationship between these digital consciousnesses and their connection to the historical William Afton remains one of the franchise's most debated aspects, with evidence supporting various readings, but no single definitive answer provided by the games themselves. Looking back at Ruin, it demonstrated that Steel Wool Studios had learned from Security Breach's troubled development. Given more time and a more focused scope, they could deliver polished, effective horror experiences within the Five Nights at Freddy's framework. The DLC's darker tone and willingness to leave Cassie's fate ambiguous showed maturation in storytelling. Not everything needed neat resolution. Sometimes horror was most effective when it left you uncertain whether hope survived in the darkness. Return to virtual nightmares. Five Nights at Freddy's. Help Wanted 2. On May 24th, 2023, during a PlayStation showcase, Steel Wool Studios announced Five Nights at Freddy's. Help Wanted 2. A direct sequel to the VR experience that had introduced Glitch Trap. The game released on December 14th, 2023 for PlayStation VR 2 and Steam VR, with a non-VR flat version arriving on June 20th, 2024, free for those who'd purchased the VR version. Help Wanted 2 maintained the structure of its predecessor, a collection of mini-games and experiences set within the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience, this time focused on being a Fazbear Entertainment employee rather than a security guard. You performed various jobs across different areas of a pizzaplex, the game using the same setting as Security Breach, but as a training simulation rather than the real location. The gameplay challenges varied wildly in mechanical focus. The carousel repair had you servicing a ride while Carney, a hostile carnival animatronic, attempted to sabotage your work. Pfizer Blast recreated the laser tag experience from Security Breach, now with you defending against waves of animatronics. Arts and crafts in the daycare required managing Sun, while creating items, transforming into a chase sequence when Moon emerged in darkness. The kitchen prep games had you assembling pizza and other food items, while animatronics lurked nearby, ready to attack if you took too long or made mistakes. Sister Location received special attention with a faithful VR recreation of that game's entire campaign. Experiencing those locations and mechanics in first-person VR, particularly the spring-lock suit sequence, amplified the horror significantly. The already claustrophobic feeling of being trapped in a suit while animatronics searched nearby became almost unbearable in VR, your real hands moving to windlocks while your virtual surroundings threatened death from multiple directions. The hub area between minigames featured arcade cabinets, collectible plushies, and most importantly, a mask that slowly constructed itself as you progressed. The Vanny mask from Ruin appeared here, suggesting the player character was somehow connected to that story. The mask construction paralleled the Vanny mask creation from the original Help Wanted's DLC, implying a similar corruption or transformation process. Glitchtrap's presence remained ambiguous throughout most of the experience. The entity didn't appear as overtly as in the first game, leading to speculation about whether he'd been destroyed or merely changed form. The reveal came through finding hidden objects throughout the minigames, collectible toys that, when gathered, unlocked a secret ending showing Glitchtrap's fate. The normal ending suggested the player character had completed their training and would be deployed as a technician. Community theories proposing this character might be Cassie's father from Ruin draw from various circumstantial evidence and thematic parallels, though the game provides no explicit confirmation of this connection. The secret ending revealed something darker. The collected toys formed into action figures called Faz Force, an amalgamation recalling Ennard from Sister Location. When assembled, Glitchtrap's digital form emerged from a charging station, and the player character was attacked by staff bots, seemingly transformed into the mask bot seen in Ruin. This sequence suggested one possible origin for how the Vanny masks were created and distributed, though as with much of the recent lore, the exact details and their canonical status remain open to interpretation. Alternatively, completing a different set of challenges unlocked Princess Quest IV, a continuation of the arcade games from Security Breach. This sequence showed the princess, representing Vanessa, confronting old man consequences, the character from Ultimate Custom Night, who'd advised rest and peace. An exchange of masks occurred, with the princess receiving Vanny's mask, which she then destroyed, while a massive Vanny figure watched the scene, suggesting Vanny as a separate entity from Vanessa, perhaps a digital demon that had been created by Glitchtrap and could possess different hosts. The game's release included ongoing updates, with a free DLC connecting to Ruin arriving on December 10th, 2024. This update further developed the Vanny system's lore and its connection to the Mimic's plans, showing how the technology that helped Cassie also potentially enabled further corruption and control. Critical reception for Help Wanted 2 was generally positive among VR enthusiasts, who appreciated the variety of experiences and the improved polish compared to Security Breach. The sister location Recreation was particularly praised for demonstrating how effective the original game's design remained when experienced from within VR. The multiple endings and hidden content rewarded exploration and mastery, giving dedicated players substantial content to discover. The flat-screen version, while appreciated as a gesture to those without VR equipment, couldn't replicate the experience effectively. The physical presence and immersion that made Help Wanted memorable simply didn't translate to a standard monitor, reducing the game to competent but unexceptional minigame collection. VR proved essential to the experience in ways that limited the audience but created more impactful horror for those who could play as intended. Looking back at Help Wanted 2, it served as connective tissue between Security, Breach, Ruin, and whatever comes next. The game clarified some of the confusion around Glitchtrap's fate and Vanny's nature, while introducing new mysteries about the Vanny system and the Maskbot. It demonstrated Steel Wool Studios' comfort with VR development, creating experiences specifically designed for the medium, rather than simply porting existing ideas. The franchise's commitment to exploring multiple technological frontiers, from traditional games to VR to AR to flat-screen adaptations, showed a willingness to experiment and evolve rather than endlessly repeating the original formula. Not every experiment succeeded equally, but the variety prevented stagnation, keeping the franchise feeling fresh even after more than a decade and dozens of releases. Reflections on a decade of nights. As we drift toward dawn after this long journey through every major installment of Five Nights at Freddy's, from the simple office of that first game to the elaborate virtual experiences of Help Wanted 2, we've witnessed a franchise that refused to remain static. What began as one developer's response to criticism became a cultural phenomenon that spawned sequels, books, merchandise, movies, and innovations across multiple gaming platforms and technologies. The series' evolution mirrored changes in gaming itself. The first 4 games, developed rapidly by Scott Cawthon working alone, represented indie horror at its purest. Clever mechanics, atmospheric dread, and viral popularity spread through YouTube and word of mouth. Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator showed Cawthon pushing his solo development to its limits, creating increasingly complex narratives and varied gameplay. The partnership with Steel Wool Studios for Help Wanted, Security Breach, and beyond marked the franchise's transition to larger-scale productions with professional development teams, bigger budgets, and ambitious technical goals. The lore that wove through these games created one of gaming's most intricate and debated mythologies. From the simple horror of possessed animatronics hunting night guards to the tragic family saga of the Aftons. From the corporate negligence of Fazbear Entertainment to the metaphysical questions of consciousness and Remnant, the story grew far beyond anyone's expectations in 2014. The community's engagement with this lore, the endless theories and timeline debates, became as much a part of the Five Nights at Freddy's experience as the games themselves. The franchise demonstrated that horror games could succeed without combat systems or complex mechanics. The best entries in the series understood that limitation creates tension, that vulnerability and resource management generate far more lasting dread than empowerment and action. Whether trapped in an office with draining power, hiding in a bedroom relying on sound cues, or sneaking through a massive complex avoiding patrolling animatronics, the core feeling remained. You are prey, and survival depends on intelligence and nerve rather than strength. The technological experimentation, VR experiences that placed you literally inside haunted locations, AR that brought animatronics into your actual living space, showed a franchise willing to embrace innovation rather than coasting on its established formula. Not every experiment succeeded. Special Deliveries server shutdown proved the risks of live service models. But the willingness to try new approaches kept Five Nights at Freddy's relevant and interesting as gaming trends evolved. The aesthetic evolution from lo-fi camera feeds and simple 3D models to elaborate, detailed environments showcased gaming technology's advancement over the decade. Yet the series never forgot that limitation could serve horror as well as or better than photorealism. The grainy security footage of the original games created as much fear as security breaches detailed animatronic models, proving that atmosphere and design matter more than raw graphical fidelity. The music and sound design, often overlooked when discussing the franchise, deserves recognition for creating much of its effectiveness. From the original game's oppressive silence broken by mechanical footsteps and doors banging to help-wanted spatial audio creating directionality and presence, the franchise understood that horror lives in what you hear as much as what you see. The animatronics' voice lines, their mechanical movements, the ambient sounds of locations all contributed to making these spaces feel alive with threat. The jump scares, often dismissed as cheap tricks by horror purists, functioned as effective punishment for failure, consequences that motivated the defensive gameplay that preceded them. The best entries balanced the threat of jump scares with strategic elements, making you work to avoid them, rather than simply triggering them randomly. When a jump scare occurred, after you'd fought to survive, when you'd managed resources carefully and made tactical decisions that almost but not quite kept you safe, the sudden attack felt earned and terrifying rather than merely startling. The franchise's impact extended beyond its own games, spawning the mascot horror genre, where seemingly innocent characters, children's entertainers or friendly mascots, became sources of terror. Games like Poppy Playtime, Bendy and the Ink Machine, and countless others followed Five Nights at Freddy's blueprint of combining cute designs with horrifying implications. The series proved that corporate mascots and children's entertainment venues were fertile ground for horror because they represented innocence corrupted, safety revealed as dangerous. The moral complexities added depth beyond simple monster stories. William Afton wasn't just evil. He was a father who'd lost his daughter to his own creations and responded by destroying other families. Henry Emily sought redemption for his unwitting role in enabling tragedy. Michael Afton carried guilt for accidentally killing his brother and spent his undead existence trying to make amends. The child spirits trapped in animatronics weren't simply victims, but confused beings acting on instinct, unable to distinguish friend from foe. These layers of tragedy and consequence elevated the series above simple horror. The commercial success of Five Nights at Freddy's demonstrated that independent developers could create franchises rivaling major publishers. Cawthon's work proved you didn't need a 80 per way budget or team to create something memorable and profitable. The series sold millions of copies, generated massive merchandise sales, secured a Hollywood film adaptation, and made Cawthon independently wealthy, all starting from one game developed in 6 months by one person. The controversy that occasionally surrounded the franchise, debates about working conditions in rapid development, discussions about appropriate horror themes in games, marketed partly toward younger audiences through their colorful characters, the unfortunate backlash Cawthon faced over political donations, all illustrated how large the series had become and how invested people were in it. Five Nights at Freddy's transcended being just a game series to become a cultural touchstone for a generation of gamers. Looking toward the future, the franchise shows no signs of stopping. New games are in development. The movie sequel is planned. The lore continues expanding through books and other media. Steel Wool Studios and Cawthon's chosen successors are carrying the torch forward, finding new ways to terrify and surprise audiences while honoring what made the original games special. But as this night ends and dawn approaches, as we've surveyed every major game from August 2014 through December 2023, covering over 9 years and more than a dozen major releases, the question becomes, what will the next decade hold? How will Five Nights at Freddy's continue evolving? What new technologies will it embrace? What new nightmares will Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and their mechanical family bring? Those answers wait in the quiet dark of future nights. For now, this journey through every game is complete. The history is told, the mechanics explained, the lore explored. Whether you're about to drift into sleep with these stories fresh in mind, or you're wide awake having followed every detail, you've now experienced the complete chronicle of Five Nights at Freddy's as it existed through 2023 and into early 2024. The animatronics might finally rest. Or perhaps they're simply waiting for the next night to begin, ready to terrorize a new generation of night guards, ready to continue the story that started with one office, 1 week, and one simple question. Can you survive until 6 in the morning? If you enjoyed this deep dive into every Five Nights at Freddy's game, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more comprehensive lore explorations and gaming history. Whether you're here for the soothing narration before sleep or genuinely interested in understanding this franchise's incredible journey, your support helps create more content like this. Thanks for spending these hours with me, wandering through dark pizzerias and impossible nightmares, uncovering the secrets that have kept fans enthralled for over a decade. Until next time, stay safe out there. The animatronics might be fiction, but the fear they create and the stories they tell are very real indeed.